have some sort of rally?
If you were to answer that question only from the perspective of the US, the answer would be yes. We are seeing demand destruction, and you would expect demand destruction to lead to lower commodity prices much faster than it's happening. But today, you have to take into account what's happening elsewhere. So imagine a map of the world, and you start in the US. The US is where you worry least about the second round effects of the higher commodity prices. In particular, you worry least that wage earners will demand and get wage increases that embed into the system the higher commodity prices. Why? Because the economy is weak. And why is it weak? Because the housing market is under tremendous pressure, and the housing market was the ATM for US consumers. If you wanted to spend more, you refinanced your house, you took the equity out, and you spent it. That works fine when prices go up. It doesn't work when prices come down, and that's what's happening today. If you just ask the question from the perspective of the US, the answer is absolutely demand destruction is ongoing, commodity prices will have to come down. But as you go east, that story changes. Get to Europe, where the housing market is not as stretched outside the United Kingdom, and they worry much more about inflation than about demand. And they have to take preemptive policy action. You get to Russia and China, where the economies are red hot. And there, the problem is not demand, the problem is that the inflation is getting embedded into the system. And that's one of the most difficult things for investors today, is to recognize that the cycles are no longer coordinated. The big risk we see at PIMCO, and it's one we talk about every single day, is the tipping point. If commodity prices stay where they are for a long time, then you will tip the risk from inflation to stagnation across the world. And that is the big issue. If you're a believer that commodity prices will stay this high for the next 6 to 9 months, you should be incredibly defensive. If, however, you believe that the demand destruction is going to occur faster, then there are significant opportunities in today's market.
Where do you think we are in the cycle of getting through the backlog of houses that exist on the market now, and when do you think this is over?
As an owner of a house in Boston that I couldn't sell, I would hope that we are towards the end of the process. Based on the analysis that we've done at PIMCO, and we've had a really good team that went into the field, we know we're near the end. This housing correction will go on well into 2009, maybe into 2010. And what we're seeing, and it's very worrisome, is a change in behavior of house owners. In the old days, the last thing you would miss is your home payment. Today, the evidence coming out that people miss their home payments before doing other things. Why? Because they're upside down on their mortgage. My friend Paul McCulley reminds me of the Simon & Garfunkel song that has the line, "Drop off the keys, Lee, and set yourself free." And what we're starting to see is people literally dropping off the keys to set themselves free, because they say, what's the point of me continuing to pay on this mortgage if I'm so upside down? The minute you have that behavior, then housing prices overshoot on the downside, because everybody knows there's a distressed seller, there's a foreclosure coming, and you might as well wait because someone's going to have to sell. And that's the dynamics that we're in. And the big question is whether you get legislation out of Capitol Hill to act as a circuit breaker. If you don't, then we're still early on in this housing correction.
It seems likely that we will get some sort of legislation that will remove the mortgages to the FHA, where the FHA then takes over and charges the homeowners 1% or 1.1%, I think is the proposal, and then take some of the upside on the sale of the house. Do you think that would help the housing market and therefore the economy?
What's being discussed today in the Frank Dodd plan is a step forward, but on its own it's not enough to change the momentum. So it would help at the margin, but it will not be a catalytic force that changes the momentum. And the reason why is that we are in the midst of these feedback loops where things get worse. Just imagine had I told you a year ago that the policymakers were going to take all these exceptional actions, a fiscal stimulus package that sends checks to a lot of people, a mortgage act. The Federal Reserve would aggressively cut rates from 5.25% to 2%. It would open the window for investment banks. And I said, imagine all this happening. My reaction would have been, wow, that is really aggressive policy. And yet, if you look at where the economy is today, this very aggressive policy has proven too little, too late. And that's a reflection of all these feedback loops that the US economy in particular is stuck in right now. And either we need to wait till markets reprice at a very low level, and that will be very painful, or you need more aggressive action out of both the Fed and the fiscal authorities.
So part of this obviously has to do with what you call the ATM aspect of the house, and part of it has to do with the credit crunch that has developed as a result of the subprime. Where do you think we are in that credit crunch?
The credit crunch is 85% over, but the problem is it has morphed into something else. It has morphed into a general economic weakness. So we can declare victory on the credit crunch, and that victory has come at a high cost. The credit crunch has morphed into an economic dislocation. And that economic dislocation is hitting the consumer, who has been very robust so far, but he or she now faces higher prices, lower employment, a lower ATM because of what's happening to the housing stock, and a credit crunch. So the next phase of recapitalization will be the US consumer, and that is why most likely the dislocation, as opposed to the credit crisis, the dislocation will continue to next year.
Is it possible that the government could do another round of sending checks out to people? Does it make sense to the government to do another round?
The government's going to have to. And the irony is going to have to do something that is not the most efficient response. Why does it have to? When you are reducing the balance sheet of the financial sector, and you have to reduce the balance sheet of the consumer, which is the reality of today and tomorrow, unless you're willing to tolerate a major recession, you have to provide another balance sheet. The easy thing to do is to send checks to everybody. The problem is it doesn't get to the heart of the real challenge, stabilizing the housing market and stabilizing the financial sector. And that is politically very difficult. Why? Because you are bailing out people who shouldn't be bailed out. You are signaling to the world that it's okay to privatize the game